You might be wondering why a lawyer is speaking here at ISOG. Personally, I feel that it's a very important time to look at regulatory and legislation, considering that there is a push from government now to develop cybersecurity legislation, part of which I'll mention even later. And also, I'm sure most of you have heard, the government has issued the National Cybersecurity Plan 2023-2028, updating the NCSP 2022. It's a very robust and comprehensive plan, but it sets down a lot of work streams, which I believe, as members of ISOG, as members of the ICT community, you all should participate in the crafting of these items. So let me begin. I'm, again, Omar from HUAWEI Philippines, Public Relations. I'm also the head of public policy. And I've been a lawyer for 14 years, but I have had the unique pleasure of being able to take on multiple hats. I've done data privacy, I've done cybersecurity operations, I've done policy, regulatory legislation, etc. And I've become especially interested in the development of policy and regulations. That's why I'm presenting on this topic today. In most jurisdictions, so this is a survey of about 13 countries and their cybersecurity legislations. China, EU, US, UK, India, Brazil, etc. And we've noticed that for the most part, governments need to issue a national cybersecurity strategy. That's going to be your guiding document that sets aside the mission, that sets down the goal. Right? This is the general direction that we're supposed to be going as a country. Now, through the different countries' NCS, you will see commonly identified challenges. First, increasing number of cybercrime, increasing level of sophistication in cyber attacks, and increasing vulnerabilities in critical infrastructure. Diba? Every year, nadadagdagan lang yung CVB, CEE na listahan. And then commonly identified goals for the NCSs is that always, paulit-ulit, and you will hear this frequently when there's a talk on cybersecurity. Enhance cyber resilience, control cybersecurity risk, leverage international cooperation, and build an openness and connection-enabled cyberspace. We've heard all of this before, right? But to put it into writing in a guiding document is something else entirely. So yun na, yung kanina, yun yung challenges and goals of NCS in general. If you look at our current NCSP, which was approved by the President in February, and an executive order was issued, I think, around April. There are some similarities, but these are the identified challenges. Ill-defined reporting mechanisms, slow improvement of Philippine cybersecurity posture, poor adoption of policies, slow exchange of information, and reluctance to invest in cybersecurity and lack of resources and manpower. Now, when you look at a document like this, and you say, these are the challenges that we're facing, right? The question is, how then do you solve it? And what is the end goal? And when defining a problem, in problem solving, that to me is the most important. You define what the problem is because that will dictate the solution. And that will dictate the policy, the legislation that will enable the solution. And we'll see this later on. Now for the goals, NCSP takes from the Philippine Development Plan. There are chapters there on cybersecurity, and it comes up with 3 stated goals. Protect the state and its people, increase cybersecurity workforce, and strengthen the policy framework. Now, when you say strengthen the policy framework, NCSP says we should have a new cybersecurity bill. It says we should pass, the president should, it's recommended that the president issue an executive order on critical information infrastructure protection. It recommends actual work streams, and these things will become law and impact all of us, right? Next slide, please. That's why I hope everyone, if you can, participates. There are 9 key issues across the different legislation that's common among those 13 countries. Let's just take a look at 4, because I don't think we have time to discuss everything that's there. So for me, these 4 are the most critical. Critical infrastructure protection, incident response and crisis management, combating cybercrime, and non-personal data protection legislation. Okay, when you craft policy on critical infrastructure protection, you typically have 4 types of content, right? One, who is defined to be CI or CII? Two, who's going to be the coordinating agency? Three, what are the duties of CI? And for miscellaneous, it's your transitory provisions, it's your providing budget, etc. Each of those, the first three, are actually very difficult decisions to make, right? Mag-aaway tayo, who's CI, who's not. Why? Because potentially, if you identify my company as CI, then I might be held to certain standards, which, anong cybersecurity? Cost center, di ba? Hindi tayo profit center, sadly. So, we're a negative on the bottom line. So if you're identified as CI, maybe you have to spend more, right? Coordinating agency. There's the CICC, Cybercrime Investigating and Coordination Center, the ICT Cybersecurity Bureau. There's the Department of Justice Office of Cybercrime. There's the AFP, Cyber Defense, etc. Ang dami, di ba? So who now do you go to? Right? Who's going to coordinate? And duties of operators, what will you be mandating operators to do? Operators of CII. And are these reasonable? So, yun nga, yung apat. Now, on definition and scope, in other countries, typically, they either define critical infrastructure or define critical information infrastructure, or in some rare instances, they define specific entities. Sasabihin, for example, company X, you are a critical entity. Company Y is not. And then usually they will come up with some kind of formula to determine who's going to be considered CI. And then there will be a body that will actually designate your CI or not. And if you look at the NCSP, the executive order there actually takes that approach, that the government seems to want to have specific entities defined as CI. But did you know, we already have actually in the Philippines policies which provide which sectors are CI. That follows the NCSP 2022. There are DICT circulars from 2017 that says power, telecommunications, banking, etc. Your CI. And it creates actually a reporting mechanism, reporting system. That if you're a regulated entity, if you're a telco, you report cybersecurity incidents to NTC. If you're a bank, you report to BSP, and so on. Nasusunod ba? Yun yung tanong. Right? But then, as I would say, regardless of whether or not the policy has a penal clause, that's why most companies have DPOs but not CISOs. Kasi may penalty sa Data Protection Act for failure to report, for failure to file. Walang penalty for failure to report ng cybersecurity incidents. But anyway, so CIs are identified already by sector, but we're changing the approach to identifying them by entity. So that's going to be done, I hear, from either by an executive order or by a legislation. And I have, from just listening to news, heard that DICT is actually working on a cybersecurity bill. There are multiple versions, and in some, the cybersecurity component is separate, and there are actually bills filed on critical information protection. But I think during an NCSP briefing a few weeks ago, they're going to merge the two. Anyway, so there's a definition of CI that's common among different countries, and then the National Cybersecurity Plan gives its own definition. But curiously, it talks about CI and CII, which, if you're a lawyer, implies that these two things are different, and that CII is a subset of CI. Right. However, if you look at our other laws, there are existing definitions of CI. Public Service Amendment Act, Cybercrime Prevention Act. Mali yan. Yung isa is the same number, yeah. Yes, yes. The one at the bottom is the Cybercrime Prevention Act. The second one is the is the anti-terrorism law, right? And more or less, the definitions are similar. But I'm just wondering, why didn't they just take the definitions? And the answer would be, the mindset seems to be, CII is different. Okay? And that's how you do interpretation. So CII is different. That seems to be the message. Ayun. Second decision to make, who's going to be the coordinating agency, right? Because you have technical professional organizations, you have standards organizations, you have certs, right? So who do you want to be to do the job? You want to create a separate agency, make it similar to the NPC, put it under the ICT, or you want to make it standalone, right? Or put it under the Office of the President? Or will a bureau within an agency suffice, like the Cybersecurity Bureau? These are decisions that have to be made because you don't want what constantly happens, which you call PIG, no? Policy implementation gap. So when people make regulations, when legislators craft, they have this picture in their minds on how it's going to work, right? And they have intended consequences. Okay, this is what's going to happen. But unless that's aligned, unless you give inputs from people who are actually doing operations or actually doing that day to day, there's going to be a disconnect between how you imagine policy will work and what actually happens. Example lang, SIM card registration law, right? I actually was the Legislative Liaison Division Chief at the time. No? And the goal was no more smishing, no more scams, right? Nangyari ba? I mean, let's ask ourselves honestly, right? Now what then, okay, iba yung inimagine nila, they viewed how it would work differently from what actually happened. No? So that's the kind of situation we want to avoid. So this coordinating agency, sino, and then what will it do? And then how do you capacitate them? What's the budget requirement? How many people, etc. Problem is, if you want to create a new body, a new entity, some government agencies might oppose because budgetary requirements, diba? So this is, you're familiar with this, with this framework, the identify, protect, detect, respond, recover. You're familiar, right? Alam niyo na to. However, are these duties mandatory right now? No, right? And these duties, maybe some of your organizations are very robust and have the people and have the budget to do all of this. But others do not. So if I'm the regulator, who can afford to do this? Who cannot? So I have to make very fine distinctions, right? Kasi pwede namang sabihin mo, my gross revenue annually is 100 to 100 million. Yun pala, napaka-importante ng ginagawa mo, right? Yun pala, if something happens to your computer systems, a lot of people are going to be affected. So you can't just make a distinction based on revenue. Pag impact naman, it's hard to weigh impact until it happens because you won't know the extent of the attack. So these are things that you're going to have to decide if you want to make mandatory. Yeah. Especially cyber incident response. And this is actually palagi, di ba, sharing of information, right? How many of you guys in your organizations have actually reported to government that you had an incident? Right? Again, incident, ha? We're not talking about a breach. Because if there's a breach, it involves personal information, you report to the NPC. You're supposed to get fined, what, 0.25% up to 2%, something like that. Sino sa inyo nag-report ng incident? to government, di ba? Oh, you're honest. You're honest, right? But those types of incidents that you report, I am sure, right? You reported end of the year, not now. If you look at other countries, there are actually reporting requirements of 48 to 72 hours. Same for privacy. Di ba? May nangyari. Inatake ka. Okay, takot ka mag-report. Bakit? You might get penalized. But government wants you to report, not because government wants to, at least kung ako ha, because you want to know who is doing what. What threat actors are engaged in which attack vectors using what ransomware, etc. Diba? So, in other countries, you have this. What's the reporting path? Kanino ka magre-report, saan yung escalation? Is there a time requirement? Usually 48 to 72 hours. And then what do you put when you report? How specific they have to be, right? So for incident response and crisis management, there are two aspects which you should look at, right? Cybersecurity incidents have become a new era in crisis management and have been integrated into national crisis management frameworks. And incident response laws reflect the lessons learned from cybersecurity incidents and cover detection, classification, response, and short-term recovery. Basically, in other countries, either they create their own law for cybersecurity incident, or they fold it into other laws, whether it's data protection or privacy or some other laws. So you have to decide, do you want a separate law or do you want to just amend DPA or amend some other existing law? Basically, the point here is just there is a shift in other countries from viewing cybercrime as the goal being catching the criminal to preventing the crime from happening in the first place. And that's a trend that's ongoing right now. There is a new trend on non-personal data protection legislation. You can actually do a lot of things with non-personal data, right? So these are data that you cannot use to identify people, but they can be used for cyber attacks. So I'll just point that out as something that is a developing field right now. And only a few countries have provided for this type of law. EU, China, UAE. So 5 considerations that you have to take. You shouldn't just blindly follow another country's legislation. Legislation, whether for cybersecurity or not, no, for any topic, should be tailor-fit to the specific situation of the country. So in this case, the Philippines. Because you have diverse and multiple stakeholders, you have different development priorities. We're a developing nation. Supposedly, we're a middle power now. But our priorities might be different from, say, other ASEAN countries, even Malaysia or Thailand, no? Even though geographically we're in the same area. There are unique national circumstances, varying exposures to threats. Before pandemic, I don't think there was a lot of interest in the Philippines because what's there to hack, right? Whose financial information, whose money is there to try to steal? Different cyber maturity level and diverse approaches and opportunities. Basically, each country has to decide for himself, and the way to do that is to have people involved. If you're going to design cybersecurity legislation, make sure it's affordable. Okay? Sasabihin nyo, everyone should get, let's say, ISO 27,000, everyone. Mahal naman yun. You're going to spend what, 300,000, 500,000, a million every year getting certified. It has to be realistic, right? Otherwise, hindi susunod yung tao. And you're not going to see the kind of implementation you want. You're going to have a pig. You recognize cybersecurity as a shared responsibility. And I think that is self-explanatory. But aside from, di ba, zero trust binabanggit, we have another view. It's called many hands, many eyes. Right? It's a shared responsibility. Kung maraming nakatingin, marami ring gumagawa. Diba? You have the ability to take over when there are gaps in responsibilities. You just create your own cybersecurity baseline that gives you your foundation, and then you can just keep on improving it, improving it, improving it, improving it, improving it. Collaborate to solve cybersecurity problems. There should be some trust between government and the private sector, especially in information sharing. I remember Philippine CERT is part of AP CERT, Asia Pacific CERT, and then we would share bulletins. Every day you'd get emails from Japan CERT, from Singapore CERT, ganyan, saying, oh, we've detected X incidents were reported to us. These threat actors seem to be more active. Diba? And finally, last slide, you balance security and development. Don't make your policies and your legislation too restrictive that you're going to cut off innovation. But at the same time, you don't want to have this wild, wild west situation where there's no oversight, there's no regulation whatsoever, that people's information, people's rights are put at peril. And then finally, again, just a summary of the 5 considerations. Cybersecurity legislation should be affordable. Cybersecurity is a shared responsibility. Strengthen your baseline, collaborate to solve cybersecurity problems, and balance security and development. So if you have any questions, that's my QR. So there's also Arnie Alvarez, our CTO's QR. If you want your organizations to have a free cybersecurity assessment, I'd like to just leave with this thought, no? And we are in the midst of a digital transformation. Lot of growth in e-commerce. We passed the Internet Transactions Act, for example. But how much resources are we devoting to cybersecurity capability development, right? In your organizations, what's your budget of the total budget? 0.5%? 0.1%? Diba? So all of you here, I give you with a challenge. You lobby for more budget for your companies, right? Lobby for you to be able to hire more people and provide the people that you have with better training. Diba? Ako, personally, I always try to lobby for that because of the seriousness of the problem. Not the problem we are facing in the future, but something that is existing right now. So with that, once again, thank you for having me today.